Excellent. Thanks, Matt. Liz, I'm curious from your perspective and stories that you've written, what sectors, like Matt mentioned, do you see kind of at the forefront of what's next?
I think it's been really exciting seeing what various large companies are doing to sort of respond to consumer sentiment. So, I've been tracking this story that emerged over the last 3 or 4 years, and it all began because there was this turtle in the ocean that had that straw up its nose, right? Everybody remembers this. And it was so strange because, I've been writing about sustainability for such a long time. And there was this moment where everybody freaked out because of the turtle, and it was kind of weird because in a short amount of time, so many companies started making commitments around getting rid of straws. Hotel chains started saying that they were going to use paper straws instead. Companies started inventing new straws. I mean, it just spurred a lot of innovation, right? Because of that turtle. And so I guess my point is just that, I agree policy is a huge part of it because we can't rely on consumers alone. And we certainly can't rely on companies alone. But I do think that companies and policymakers do respond when people, when consumers start speaking up and start freaking out about these issues. And I think that companies then feel compelled to start responding, right? And so I really do think that that all of these commitments that we're seeing that came out of that moment, or that the couple of years where people were really worrying about the oceans and plastic. I think that was really powerful. What's really exciting to me is that there was this initial sort of response, and there were all these companies that were getting rid of plastic, right? I think that now we're seeing companies that are working on more infrastructure changes, sort of beginning to have their day, right? Because now there's a market for it, right? And so the things that I'm excited about are some of these things that that were finalists in the Reusies, right? So there are these companies that are developing systems where you can drink out of a cup when you're at a drive-through or whatever, and they make it really easy for you to deposit your cup somewhere else. It could be a totally different place, right? Or companies like Algramo, which allow you to sort of refill containers you already have in a very convenient ways. So I guess my overarching point here is that I think that when populations speak up, when consumers speak up, it can produce change. And sometimes as consumers, you don't really see it, but as somebody who's a journalist and sort of watching these things happen, it's pretty inspiring to see how these moments of protest and these moments of making these cases that this is not the life you want to live, right? It does have an impact on everything, and it might take a few years for these changes to come about, but look at what's happening, right? Out of that moment came all of these different changes that we're seeing right now. So I think that that's really inspiring.
Yes, it is. That's an interesting point that you brought up. First, I want to shout out my friend, Dr. Christine Figner. She's the one who was on that vessel, filmed that video. She's an incredible marine scientist. So shout out to Christine. But what I wanted to get to is that I think what you're pointing toward is the fact that we, as human beings, naturally gravitate toward empathy. And we saw an animal suffering, and therefore that sparked a different thought and process about that particular item. But there are a lot of people that would argue taking away plastic straws is just one little drop in the bucket, and it's not really going to affect the larger change that we need. And then also grappling with capitalism and how we sell things, and this culture of wanting to continue to make more, build more, and build in that way. Bridget, I'm going to point this to you. I'm just curious to hear your perspective on that. How do we balance those two things when it comes to capitalism, empathy for others and other living beings, and making sure that the system can be in balance?
I think those are all really good points. And I think, Liz's explanation of the narrative that's kind of gotten us here and that moment that changed everything. I think that this is like the best case study ever of like the anatomy of a movement and how it happens. It's like this iconic moment with something, to your point, Danny, that you're super empathetic about. And it's very tangible. Whereas climate, I think, has been very challenging because it's very esoteric and it's all over us. It's, it's everywhere and it's nowhere in a way. Plastic and waste, like, you can see that. You're not going to miss that. And so it's very easy to see that kind of moment and then have a media drumbeat just kind of roll into a bigger and bigger story over time that led to kind of patchwork policy, which created risk for brands. So brands started to solve it and consumers got engaged. All of these things started to grow on each other, which is really interesting. And I think that, the question around how do we create balance here and how do we create scale? How do we get to that point where we've really made change? I think that it can feel very daunting. And so I think it's really important for people to realize we don't need 100% transition. I think to Ben's point about it's not all or nothing, there is this spectrum. There are these tipping points. If we reach 10% of consumers, then we're at a point where there's real value in the market to shift, and companies can start making money on services, on things with less packaging. They can make more of the money on the product and the service instead of having to spend that on a new package every single time. So the economics can really work, and we don't need to have mass market adoption immediately. We really need to get to maybe 7, 10, 12% adoption before the system starts to change.
Awesome. And Matt, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to respond to that. I liked what you said, Bridget, earlier about, I think it was you that said it earlier, about the consumer packaged goods companies are really in the middle of this system, right? On the other side, on the front end, are the extraction companies, and on the back side are the waste companies. And just to go back to how the system came to be, right? The one-way throwaway economy is something that we invented here in America, and we exported it to the world. And it was really invented to serve the extraction companies. That's who it was designed to serve, right? The idea was to take natural resources from the planet, get them into our hands and get them out of our hands as quickly as possible and get them to a landfill so we could justify the kind of continued mining and drilling and clear cutting of the planet. And it wasn't done in any kind of nefarious way. It was just hey, this is how we're gonna drive the economy. But you fast forward, again, 50, 60 years, and we've got, 7.5 billion people and growing, and we've exported this model all over the world, and it's broken and it doesn't work. And so, that's really the system that we have to undo. And in my mind, it's not about undoing capitalism or foregoing the pleasures of life. It's really about how do we cut off that extraction point? How do we build a more circular economy where we're cutting off, all of the extraction of natural resources from the planet on the front end, and on the back end, cutting off the waste and the pollution, so that we're really designing systems that enable human creativity to flourish while also doing that in ways that allow the people of this planet and the planet's inhabitants to flourish as well.
Wonderfully said, Matt. That's beautiful, for sure. The human creativity is unstoppable. We've proven that time and time again through generations after generation. And now this is our moment. This is our time to create something new. And it makes me so excited. So for those that are watching, especially our younger viewers, I want to do a quick round robin from the four of you. Tell us your top 3 things that you would suggest someone should do or start with just to get involved in the reuse movement. And I'll start off with Liz.
Okay, so 3 things. So I think that, as everybody's been saying today, it's partly about making it easy for yourself, right? Because I think that the thing that stops us from being part of the system is when things get inconvenient. So my top tips are: try and make it really convenient for yourself. Have multiple, bottles that are stored there, so that when one is being cleaned, you have another one that you can pick up. I have a stash of Baggu bags that are in my car at all times, because I know that when I bring some groceries in, I'm going to forget to bring them out again. Make the process just as easy for yourself as possible, so that you're not kicking yourself about what a terrible job you did, because it's really hard to remember these things, right? I think in terms of another point that I would make is just going back to what I said earlier. I think maybe taking pleasure in having beautiful objects that you really like in your life, so that the temptation to indulge in throwaway culture goes away. So, I have, having like a beautiful set of cutlery that you bring with you, that you really like, you really enjoy using this cutlery, for instance, having that with you, basically enjoying, like taking pleasure and enjoying the durable, long-lasting goods that you do have, I think makes it so much more pleasurable to use them, instead of the disposable things in your life. So those are my 2 tips.
Excellent. We'll take those 2 tips for sure. Bridget, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I love Liz's idea about just choosing something you absolutely love. Like, get a water bottle that is like something that fits within your identity, and like put stuff on it that, fits your identity. Make it part of who you are, so you want to have that. And then my other, I guess, quick tip would be gamify it for yourself and your friends. Make it a competition. Prove that you think about how you do that with walking or what you're eating or just like other things, that you gamify in your life, and how much more that creates a habit. So make it fun and interesting, compete against your friends. You could even have someone needs to buy you something, get you a meal in a reusable container, for whoever wins. But I think make it fun.
I love that. Absolutely. Fun things are great, and we can make anything fun if we try. Awesome. And Matt, what about people who want to get involved in policy, like locally? I know it's a case-by-case basis, but how do you just get started in helping shift that within your own community?
I think it was my friend Annie Leonard that helped to kind of push these ideas of flexing your citizen muscles and your consumer muscles, right? So we, a lot of folks, we've been sold on, we can shop our way to sustainability, but we know that doesn't work. That's a part of it, but we really need to be focused on flexing our citizen muscles around these ideas. And so, a lot of that is about conversations. And I think that, all politics starts with conversations, and it's not just about having a conversation maybe with your elected representative, but it literally starts around the dinner table, right? It starts with influencing your friends and family. It starts with the conversations that you have with the businesses that you frequent and support, and of course, getting more involved in policy. I mean, a lot of this starts local. I mean, there's so much incredible policy that's happening at the local and community level. And, it's often the citizens that get together at the community level that find other like-minded folks in other communities, and then they band together and get policy passed at the state level. So it all starts with conversations. And I think, one of the really powerful lessons learned that we had from kind of the straws campaigning was just how powerful it was to have a simple call to action that said something like, next time you're in a restaurant, say no to a straw. And how that opens up conversations between you and the restaurant where you're at. But more importantly, it also opens up a conversation with everybody that's sitting around the table with you, right? So if I go out to eat with 4 friends and I say, hey, no straw, my friend's like, hey, why did you say that? I can say, well, now we're having a conversation about plastic in the ocean. And next week he's out with 4 different friends and he says no straw, and that conversation circulates again. And so we kind of forget the impact and power of the conversations that we have at home in our communities, and that those are often what signals the shifting and changing of norms. And when we change norms, that has the ability to change things more quickly than almost anything else.
Those are some great tips, Matt. I can totally relate. That's the same thing every time, like clockwork. No matter where I am, who I'm eating with, that conversation starts and it feels so good. And I'm like, I'm going to keep doing this. And I encourage everybody watching to do the same, because it really does, like you said, create this shift in social norms. And we need that right now. So were there any other tips, Matt, that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest tips is we really want to put pressure on the companies themselves to change things. And so, when policy arenas are one way where you can show up and testify at a public hearing to put pressure on companies to change things. Also, just frequenting the different businesses that you connect with on a daily basis and saying, hey, have you heard about this new reuse system or this new reuse service? You could do things differently, and I'd like to help you figure that out. those kinds of things really help to show that there's a demand for doing things differently. And again, that really helps to also signify that norms are changing, not just for individuals, but for businesses as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. And Ben, what advice would you give for those watching? How do you get started in the reuse movement?
I think maybe the first thing could be to not discount tiny habits. So if you have a Starbucks coffee every single day and you stop that for the rest of your life, I mean, that's what, 20,000 less cups, right? Like single habits that you can actually stick to for the rest of your life is one that I think not only gives you a feeling of agency, but it really adds up over time. So that would be probably the first. The second, I would say, is if you want to make a purchase, maybe just wait. See something you really want, just don't press that buy button right away. Like wait a week, and by the end of that, your desire, your urge, that impulse that's been carefully groomed through marketing and algorithms will probably have the time to fade, and you can actually think like, is this something that I really need? Is this something that I really want? So that can also probably help with this conditioning of consumption that I think we've all been subject to. The third is, I think, to remember that like you can affect change wherever you have influence. And so Matt touched upon this a little bit. So you have influence in your household, you have influence with your friends, you have influence in your community. And it doesn't matter if you're a waitress. If you're a waitress, you start in the restaurant. If you're in school, you start with your school. If you're if you're a corporate person, start in your corporation. Like you can start igniting these conversations anywhere. And initially, I think the conversation does feel very lonely. Because you're like, oh no, I'm like the only weird person here that really cares about this stuff. But then what is that saying? Like, when you light a candle in the darkness, it like allows others to come and find you. That's like the best way to find your tribe, is just to say like, this is something I care about, and to be loud and obnoxious about it. And others will come and be like, oh, that's really cool. I want to come and help you too, because I care about it too. And now you can have friends, and now you're not alone. And then now you're making change together. And then that small change can then become bigger change. And then one thing leads to another, and it can cascade from there. So those are my three things.
Couldn't have said it any better. Thank you, Ben. Well, I think that's all I've got for you so far. And I'm just so thrilled to have been a part of this conversation, to hear the four of you speak vision to life, with you all at the helm and so many others who are a part of the Reusies and beyond. We've got options. We've got some exciting things coming in our future. And I'm just ecstatic to know that people like you exist. So thank you all so much for being a part of this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.